The Pearl Harbor Skull. In Hawaii in 2011, it was reported that a dredging operation at Pearl Harbor led to the discovery of a human skull. On December 7, 1941, the United States fleet at Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese. Over 2,400 US soldiers were killed, 68 civilians, and some 100 Japanese soldiers died. It was the event that brought the United States into World War II. The skull that was discovered in 2011 was intact and found with debris dating back to the 1940s. Forensic testing was completed and it was believed to be the skull of a Japanese pilot. However, more research had to be completed because there were people of Japanese descent living in Hawaii during the attack. The person who died could have been a pilot or a civilian. In 2011, researchers were 75% certain their find was that of a Japanese pilot. Their reasoning was the debris found near the skull was not native to Hawaii. That discovery was huge because remains of Japanese pilots had not been discovered until that time. The USS Hornet. The USS Hornet was an American aircraft carrier that was used in the Pacific Theater during World War II. Launched in 1940, the USS Hornet was built to carry up to 72 aircraft and was roughly 825 feet long. The USS Hornet was part of the Doolittle Raid. This mission was a bombing attack on the island of Japan. B-25 bombers were used on the mission, which occurred in April of 1942. The planes flew over Japan and completed a bombing mission. The USS Hornet was then called to the Battle of Midway. From there, it was called to a battle at the Santa Cruz Islands. This would be a fateful mission for the crew of the USS Hornet. In October 1942, a dive bomber and torpedoes damaged the USS Hornet. There was a call to abandon ship, and the crew watched as it sank in the Pacific Ocean. The ship was discovered in 2019 by the research vessel called Petrel. It was found some 17,500 feet underwater. What's fascinating about the find is that the ship was found upright. The vessel showed little deterioration. Images captured by the Petrel researchers show a ship resting at the bottom of the ocean, a truly eerie sight. The mass graves. In 2022, Polish investigators in the Bialuty forest 100 miles north of Warsaw made a grim discovery. They uncovered two mass graves containing an astonishing 17 tons of ashes, revealing the tragic fate of 8,000 Poles executed by the Nazis between 1940 and 1944. The victims were prisoned at the Soldau Nazi German prisoner camp near the town of Zieldauer. This camp held 30,000 people, including Jewish citizens, Polish elites, and resistance fighters. Shockingly, those executed were cremated, and their remains were turned into ash buried in 10-foot deep pits. Trees were planted to conceal the mass grave. Polish authorities aimed to press charges if any surviving prison guards were found. A grave and memorial service were established to honor the victims. In 2009, another mass grave was discovered in Malbork, northern Poland. Construction workers found human remains while laying a foundation for a hotel. The initial count was 60, but after completing the work, 1,800 to 2,000 remains, including those of children, were discovered. Malbork witnessed fierce fighting in 1945, and investigators were frustrated by the lack of personal belongings or identification buried with the victims. Germans lived in Malbork, and it's possible they were executed by the Soviet military during the occupation. No updates on the victims have been provided. Attempts to locate eyewitnesses have been unsuccessful, but those exhumed received proper burials. Another mass grave surfaced in Brest, Belarus in 2019. Construction workers unearthed the remains of 1,200 Jewish citizens who lived in the city's ghetto from 1941 to 1942. Brest was part of Poland during World War II, and the victims, including women and children, were executed by the Nazis. A funeral ceremony was held, attended by the community and the Israeli ambassador to Belarus. The discovery, sadly, adds to the tragic history of the Holocaust. Do you own any artifacts from World War II? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. The HMS Triumph. Kostas Doktoraidis is a diver from Greece with a knack for finding sunken ships. It was the summer of 2023 when Doktoraides announced he had found the wreckage of the HMS Triumph, a British submarine that went missing in the Aegean Sea, which is located between Greece and Turkey. The submarine measured 276 feet in length and was launched in 1938. The HMS Triumph had gone on 20 missions. They attacked German and Italian ships, landed British commandos for missions, and rescued Allied soldiers. The Triumph went missing in 1942 during an assignment. There were over 60 men on board at the time. An Italian pilot claimed he last saw the submarine near Athens, Greece. So, what happened to the HMS Triumph? Kostas Doktoraides examined the wreckage and determined that a powerful explosion sunk the ship while it was submerged. He discovered the HMS Triumph some 670 feet underwater and said the mission was the hardest mission I have ever undertaken in my life. He has not revealed the exact location of the ship to respect the privacy of those who lost their lives on the submarine in 1942. The Great Lakes Plains. During World War II, around 200 to 300 aircraft were lost in the Great Lakes, with Lake Michigan being the primary location for such incidents. This was because Navy pilots used the lake for carrier takeoff and landing qualifications. Lake Michigan provided a safer training environment compared to the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans, minimizing potential threats like enemy attacks, particularly from submarines. To support this training, the Navy converted older ships into makeshift aircraft carriers, namely the USS Wolverine and USS Sable, both decommissioned after the war. Approximately 15,000 pilots trained on Lake Michigan alone, resulting in 200 to 300 planes crashing into the lake. About 50 of these planes have been recovered, including a Grumman F-4 F-3 Wildcat fighter, now displayed at the EAA Aviation Museum in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. The crashes were attributed to pilot miscalculations and aircraft mechanical failures. Lake Huron, although not a great lake, was also used for training, serving as the burial site for some lost Army aircraft. Lake St. Clair near Detroit and Windsor saw the loss of Army planes. The Tuskegee Airmen, the first African-American pilots in World War II, conducted advanced training missions over Lake Huron, mirroring European conditions. Following their Michigan training, some were deployed to North Africa and Europe, while others transferred to a South Carolina airbase. French pilots, trained in the same Michigan location later, were also involved in crashes. Between 1943 and 1944, two Bell P-39Q Airacobras crashed during training missions, resulting in the deaths of Lieutenant Frank Moody and Lieutenant Nathaniel Rayberg. Failures in sinking machine guns with propellers were believed to be a contributing factor in Moody's crash. Additionally, 5 Republic P-47D Thunderbolts crashed in Lake Huron, with Sergeant Francois Messenger losing his life in one of these accidents. Since the 1980s, efforts have been made to locate the missing planes in Lake Michigan. Taras Lysenko and his company have successfully recovered 40 aircraft from the lake, including an SPD Dauntless dive bomber displayed at the Air Zoo near Kalamazoo, Michigan. The Navy has conducted research on the lost aircraft, benefiting from Lake Michigan's cool waters, which have preserved the planes in surprisingly good condition upon recovery. The USS Johnston. In 2019, researchers discovered the deepest shipwreck from World War II in the Pacific Ocean. It was the USS Johnston, a destroyer that was built in Seattle in 1942. It measured 376 feet and had a crew of 327 men. The Johnston sank following an incredible stand against a Japanese fleet. The fighting occurred near the Philippines at Lake Gulf in 1944. The Johnston was part of a fleet of ships trying to protect US soldiers that were storming the beaches of the Philippines to take control from the Japanese. Had the Johnston and the other ships not been in the area, then it would have been a disaster for the US troops that were storming the beaches. The USS Johnston and their fellow vessels were outnumbered and outgunned. The officers and crew of these ships were not afraid, and they took on the Japanese knowing they were in for one heck of a battle. In the end, the USS Johnston was sunk, and many members of the crew, including the captain, went down with the ship. It is said that the Japanese were so impressed with the bravery and tenacity of the USS Johnston and its crew that a senior Japanese naval officer saluted the Johnston and crew as it sank into the Pacific. When it was discovered, the USS Johnston was some 4 miles under the ocean, making it the deepest shipwreck from World War II that was discovered. Tank in the basement. A German retiree was in legal trouble around 2021 after German authorities discovered he had an actual German World War II tank, a torpedo, and an anti-aircraft gun in his cellar. The retiree was 84 years old and was being prosecuted for violating Germany's War Weapons Control Act, which regulates the manufacture, sale, and transport of weapons of war. If he was found guilty, he would be forced to pay an estimated maximum fine of $500,000. It began in 2015 when authorities received a tip that the man might be in possession of art stolen by the Germans during World War II, which is not permitted. The search of the man's home led to the discovery of weapons, the tank, and some artwork which was prohibited. It took 20 German soldiers some 9 hours to remove the tank from his home. How did the man get his hands on the tank? It was reported that he purchased the tank, a German Panther, during the 1970s from a junkyard in Britain. The man then placed the tank in his cellar and would show it off to anyone that visited his property. It was also in working condition because he used it as a snowplow during the winter. The tank the man had on his property is considered the best German tank of the war. The Panther was developed after the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Germans wanted a tank to match the superior armored tanks of the Soviet Union. The Panther was rolled out into combat in 1943. A museum in the United States reached out about purchasing the tank. It would later be ruled that the tank will be donated or a licensed collector. In case you're wondering what happened to the man, he was found guilty and was sentenced to a suspended prison sentence, but was ordered to pay a $300,000 fine. Are there any other creepy discoveries you'd like us to make a video about? Let us know down below in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see ya in the next one. Bye.